Welcome to Baby Talk Torah Portions. I'm Jason.
And I'm Lynn, and we're here to read Parsha 8 in the calendar, which is Vayishlach, which is He Sent, and in your Bibles that's Genesis 32, verse 3, through to chapter 36, verse 43.
We are Spiritual Babies, and you can come and see us on our website, spiritualbabies.net. You can also come and talk to us on Facebook, which is Facebook.com/Jason Spiritual Babies. We're on YouTube as well, Spiritual Babies. And we'd love to hear your comments, your input on our talk, and your input on what the Torah portion means. We'd like to hear different perspectives, as none of us really know 100% what the content of the Torah portion means. So
we like to basically read through the Torah portion each week. That's what we're doing here and sharing it with you. We kind of give our own input about what we think about the scripture. We just like to keep things based in the word.
Keep it real.
We do. So we'll start. I'll start here with Genesis 32, verse 3. I'm reading from the Complete Jewish Bible.
And I'm reading from the Hallelujah Scriptures.
Yaakov sent messengers ahead of him to Esau his brother toward the land of Seir, the country of Edom, with these instructions. Here is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Yaakov says, I have been living with Laban and have stayed until now. Now I might just stop at that point because there's quite an interesting insight that we read this week, or that we heard this week, whereby I know in my Bible it says here, I have been living with Laban and have stayed until now. In other versions it has dwelt, is that right?
And I have sojourned.
Sojourned. Apparently that word in Hebrew adds up to the number 613.
Yeah, each Hebrew word, each Hebrew letter has a numeric value, and there are some teachings which suggest that the numeric value of a word also has a kind of a meaningful input on what the Torah portion means.
Yeah, so that word, which is translated several times, well, differently, as I said, in mine it's living, we have sojourned, we have dwelt, but the Hebrew word, which we're looking up at the minute, has the numeric value of 613, and the sages say that this is the basis that we get the figure of the number of commandments that we have in the Torah. So if you've heard that, which you probably have, that there are 613 mitzvot, that is apparently where they get that figure from, which I found quite mind-blowing, actually. I suppose I'd never really thought where they got that figure from, that someone at some point must have gone through it and counted them up. But when you think about it, there are so many commandments that could be taken so many different ways, and some are small, some are huge. So do they all count as one, or are they multiples? Or so apparently that's where it comes from.
And the Hebrew word there is gor, which is a verb, primitive root, which means really to turn aside from the road to lodge. I imagine that because we have the phrases sojourn and dwelt with, it's really the phrase in itself is telling us that Jacob lived there for a period of time, which we know from last week's Torah portion.
I believe it's that people say that he lived the Torah for those years with Laban. So
it's one of the stories of the sages would suggests to us, or they tried to suggest to us, that he spent that time doing Torah study, which we covered a little bit of last week.
So that's interesting. So there you go. I'm going to pick up from verse 5. I have cattle, donkeys, and flocks, and male and female servants. I am sending to tell this news to you, my lord, in order to win your favor. The messengers returned to Yaakov, saying, We went to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. With him are 400 men. Yaakov became greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people, flocks, cattle, with him into 2 camps, saying, If Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, at least the camp that is left will escape. Then Yaakov said, God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Yitzhak, Adonai, who told me, Return to your country and your kinsmen, and I will do you good. I am not worthy of all the love and faithfulness you have shown your servant, since I crossed the Jordan with only my staff, but now I have become 2 camps. Please, rescue me from my brother Esau. I am afraid of him, afraid he'll come and attack me, without regard for mothers or children. You said, I will certainly do you good, and make your descendants as numerous as the grains of sand by the sea, which are so many, can't be counted.
I find this particular passage quite interesting. First of all, up until this point, we meet Jacob, and he convinces Esau to swap his inheritance, his birthright, for a bowl of red lentil soup. Then he tricks his father into giving him the blessing for Esau, and then we find him escaping from Esau because he thinks that his brother's going to kill him. He goes to a land where he finds his bride, and in fact 2 brides and 2 concubines. He manages to, through good husbandry and through some, we won't call it trickery, but in some underhand ways, he manages to establish a great flock. And during this period, God has said to him, I am with you, whatever you do. And Jacob has said, well, if you do these things, then I'll believe you're with me. But when he finds that he's really in trouble, when he believes his brother is coming with 400 men to rid him of everything he owns and his family, then he says to Jehovah, deliver me. Then he says, if you're really there, then help me. I think he relied a lot on his own ability by making sure that the promises and the blessings that were given to his mother and to him came true under his own hand. It's like almost as if he didn't have absolute faith in Jehovah, but now he realizes he can't save himself. Now he leans heavily on Jehovah.
Yeah, I agree, and I do. It feels like not a threat, but it feels like there's some kind of undertones there when he's kind of saying to God, you who told me to return to your country and kinsmen, and I will do you good. So it's kind of reminding God, you told me you were going to look after me. You told me to come here. You told me that my descendants would be numerous. And he's nearly reminding him, but also I do get a desperation here. I mean, the word, I have please rescue me from my brother. That word in other versions is save, isn't it?
Yeah, save.
Yeah, deliver me. And that's, I think it's imploring. He really does realize at this point that he needs God's help. And it's at this point, at his lowest perhaps, where he really does connect perhaps with God in a way that he mightn't have before, because as Jason was saying, he had been blessed. He was doing very well despite the ups and downs with living with Laban. He still managed to do very well, prospered, and this is he must be like quaking in his boots at the thought of meeting Esau again.
And it's interesting that he splits his camp into two groups. In the end of last week's Torah portion, we find that the name of the place means 2 camps. He sees a camp and there are angels there, and then he makes his own camp and he calls the place 2 camps. So I see somebody who's divided their own belongings into 2. So even though he's praying to Jehovah with everything he's got, he still has a contingency plan. He's got 2 groups. He's like, well, if one of them goes, I'll still have the other one.
Well, I do think that is an important part of any faith relationship, is that you ask of God and you pray that it would be his will that be done, but that you also have to do as well. There is an impetus on you as a person to make sure that you're doing your bit. I mean, it may be God's will to do what you're asking, or it may not, but you still have to put the wheels in motion.
Ask and obey.
That's right. So there is a doing action involved in that. So I'm going to move on to verse 13 here. He stayed there that night, and he chose from among his possessions the following as a present for Esau his brother: 200 female goats and 20 males, 200 female sheep and 20 males, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 colts. I'm
going to jump in here quickly.
Yeah.
This amount of animals, it might seem to us that live in the big cities an arbitrary amount or a random amount, but if we look at the animal husbandry that's used in these animals, it's very interesting that this really shows Jacob's previous time with Laban. He sends out 200 female goats and 20 male goats. And 20 male goats is the perfect amount of males to service. It's called servicing in the trade. To bring into foal 200 females. And it goes with the same for the camels. And it's interesting that he sends 30 milk camels. These are camels that were specifically used for camel milk, with their colts, with their young. If he didn't send the young, the camels would no longer produce milk.
Yeah.
The young have to be around.
I was reading this earlier in the King James Version, and it reads from 14, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 13 milk camels and their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls.
Yep.
So the kine is...
Cows.
Okay.
So we even if you sit down with a pen and paper, you can work out how many bulls you need to successfully keep a group of cows happy over a prolonged period of time, and you can work out how many male goats you need to service a certain amount of female goats. And so there's a nice free, if you ever want to take up agricultural cattle farming, there is a shopping list there of what you'll need.
Also, we know, based on the extended husbandry that Jacob was pursuing when he was with Laban, that he bred the strongest of the animals that were available. So his flock are fantastic quality, strong animals. So he's, this is the best of the best, really.
There's also a teaching, although we try to keep to the text, but as we don't believe that we could possibly know everything, or indeed a portion of what we'd like to know, we do listen to other sources, and there is a teaching that at this point Jacob realized that he'd made a mistake and in conning and tricking his brother and his father, so he wants to give back all of the physical extras that the blessing has brought to him. So we read that this is a gift, but this really is returning back to his brother what is rightfully his. And we can see this as the fat of his land, is a portion of his increase. And it's nearly a tithe to Esau, which, as we go through the portion, is a recurring theme.
Yeah, well, that's it. He can't physically give back the blessing, but he can give back the proceeds from that to some way compensate what happened to Esau. So I'm going to pick up from verse 16. He turned them over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Cross over in front of me, and keep a space between each drove and the next one." He instructed the servant in front, "When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, 'Whose servant are you? Where are you going? And whose animals are these?' then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Yaakov, and they are a present he has sent to you, my lord, Esau. And Yaakov himself is just behind us.'" He also instructed the second servant and the third, and all that followed the droves. "When you encounter Esau, you are to speak to him in the same way. And you are to add, 'And there, just behind us, is your servant Yaakov. For he said, I will appease him first with the present that goes ahead of me. Then after that, I will see him myself, and maybe he will be friendly towards me.' So the present crossed over ahead of him, and he himself stayed the night in the camp." So what I'm reading here, the drove keeping a space between them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like a strategic thing? Is he making it look bigger?
I think he's making it look bigger.
Okay.
I that's the way I read it. I mean, the one part of me says, well, maybe sending them off separately is also a safer thing in case they come across bandits, or if Esau finds the first group and massacres it gives everyone else a chance to run away. But I do think it's so when Esau sees this line of all this cattle coming to him, he's like, wow, that's really impressive thing.
I did think that. I mean, if he decided not to accept the first gift, well, then there would be a bit of space for them to turn back and double back on themselves. It
would have been interesting to know who was herding the first. Was it Jacob's favourite, or was it Jacob's least favourite? It was the first one that had to approach Esau.
Well, also, I think it's quite funny the way he goes to all the servants who are driving the animals. He says, and make sure to tell him this is coming from me. It's coming from your servant Jacob. Like, to all of them, make sure you tell him it's coming from me, which is kind of sweet as well. Like, he's still up to his old tricks. Okay, I'm going to pick up from verse 22. He got up that night, took his 2 wives, his 2 slave girls, and his 11 children, and forded the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, then sent his possessions across, and Yaakov was left alone.
Yeah, just jump in here.
Yeah.
He takes his possessions, his family, and his wives and his concubines, and sends them across the river, but stays on his own on the other side of the river. We find that through the Torah portions, a river generally means a divide of the future and safety and the promised land and perfection. And in this instance, he chooses to stay. So he doesn't cross the river with everything he owns. He stays back for a reason that's known only to him at the moment.
So he was left alone. Then some man wrestled with him until daybreak. Now I think that line, it's literally a couple of words, but that's just such a conundrum. Some man wrestled with him until daybreak. We've just been told that his family, his slave girls, his children, everything's been sent across ahead. So he's on his own. It says there in verse 24, Yaakov is left alone. And then we're told, then some man wrestled with him until daybreak. Now there are a couple of takes on this that we've read. Again, these aren't scriptural necessarily, because that's literally as much as we're told in the word.
In your complete Jewish one, does it have a capital M?
No.
Mine does have a capital M.
Oh. Let me look at the King James one, because I have it here anyway.
The capital M is to dictate that this is more than a man. It's not just a regular man, although in the Hebrew it is just the word for man, or for human, or for husband, and it doesn't suggest anything in the original text to say it's any kind of supernatural being. Yeah, and again, there are various different suspects for who this man is.
In the King James Version, it just says, he was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And that's a lowercase m as well. I know it's spoken of that, well, again, there are several theories on this. One is that it's an angel of God that he's wrestling with, because as we'll read in the next few lines, he dislocates his hip, or so we're told, in the struggle. This isn't something that, I don't know if the touch from a man would do it. Perhaps it would. Also, he seems to be bringing a message from God as well.
It's one of the most read into lines, I think, in the scriptures. In and of itself, if you look at this line in the Hebrew, it has nothing spectacular about it.
No.
Wrestled is from a Hebrew word which means wrestling in the dust, or to get dusty. So it assumes that it does pre-assume that they were on the floor and that it was in the dry area and they were dusty until the break of day. And sometimes it will say until the morning or all night. But again, there's a specific word, aliyah, which means up until, go up until. So again, that presupposes that they wrestled in the dust for the whole night until the sun came up the next day.
Yeah, okay. What I'll say basically, and then we will read the actual lines, and you can think in your own mind which of the options sounds the most plausible to you. We had the angel of God, basically. That's one option. Another option is that he's wrestling with an unknown man that we don't know and doesn't have a huge significance. It's just a man that's being used in this story. We have the situation that it could be wrestling with himself, that he's there wrestling with his conscience, and he spends the whole night mulling over meeting Esau the next day. There's another writing that says that it could possibly be Esau, that Esau comes to meet him ahead of time and that they have a tussle. Okay, so with those in mind, I'm going to read the next few lines, and you can see in your own mind what you think makes the most sense. Then some man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he did not defeat Yaakov, he struck Yaakov's hip socket, so that his hip was dislocated while wrestling with him. The man said, "Let me go, because it's daybreak." But Yaakov replied, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" And he answered, "Yaakov." Then the man said, "From now on you will no longer be called Yaakov, but Israel, because you have shown your strength to both God and men, and have prevailed." Yaakov asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why are you asking about my name?" And blessed him there.
In the Hallelujah scriptures, the he referring to the stranger, the man, is also capitalized, whereas Jacob's isn't. So this scripture here is trying to tell us that there's something, or the person that edited the scripture is trying to tell us that there's something divine about this he. We also see that in the CJB, in the Complete Jewish Bible, it struck his hip, and in mine it says touched, and I think the closest definition in English that's going to meet the Hebrew is touched.
The King James Version says he touched the hollow of his thigh, which is not quite the same as his hip socket.
No, it's the same area that that the hand was placed under the thigh during times of a promise or a covenant, and it's or servitude, and it's the same area, most commonly referred to as a man's groin area.
The thing is, though, I mean, anatomically, the hip is quite a distance from your inner thigh. So that to me is quite a departure to read that version and then to read what it says in the New King James. I mean, it mentions in that about what is it, a muscle that shrank or something? What is it?
The muscle that shrinks is in some versions. We'll get to that in the next couple of lines.
Okay, grand. Yeah, the sinew that shrank.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think anatomically that to me sounds very different. Although both would discombobulate you quite considerably, I would imagine.
Yeah, if you're a guy and someone strikes you anywhere around that particular area, the shock alone would make you stop and think.
Yeah.
But Jacob, he knows what he wants and he's going to get it, and he struggles with this man. And he says, "I'm not going to let you go until you give me a blessing." And so, looking at this from the point of view that Jacob is wrestling with his own conscience, and he spent the night in his own is thinking, what am I going to do tomorrow when I meet Esau? I have to give everything back to him. Did he at that point pray to God and say, "Can you give Esau my blessing?" And then struggle with himself, saying, "Well, I need a blessing too. What's going to replace the blessing that I got from my father?" Or is it Esau? Does he wrestle with Esau and wants his blessing and forgiveness? We're never really going to know.
I thought it was interesting when I read the line, "From now on you will no longer be called Yaakov but Israel, because you have shown your strength to both God and men and have prevailed." In other versions it says something more along the lines of, "You've overcome nearly." In the King James it says, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed it." Which I think is kind of quite different.
He's given this name, and we have to assume that he's given this name from Yehovah in whatever form.
Yeah.
And
it does mean wrestle with God, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's it says it there it said because you have, and then he's naming him for that reason.
Yeah. So yeah, because you have shown your strength to both God and men and have prevailed, I think that's quite different to saying something more along the lines of, "You've overcome nearly." You can't overcome when it comes to God, because he's always the one that will have the power and omnipotence. I don't know whether it's I mean, he is just a man, and he might be very stubborn, he might be very, he's desperate to get his blessing. I suppose if he's showing his strength to God, then I can understand that a bit better.
Well, I kind of, when I look at this passage, I see that if it is an angel of God, or if it is some form of God, I don't think it was Jehovah. I don't think he's in the business of coming down and pretending to be some guy.
Yeah.
So chances are it's an angel. It's kind of like when a dad has an arm wrestle with a little kid.
Oh yeah.
And the little kid's going, "Oh, I'm gonna do it," and the dad's, that's not really having a try, but he's making it look like he's putting on a fight, because then the angel just reaches down and, regardless of the area, touches him, and Jacob loses his strength. What's interesting about the fact that we see that the name Israel means wrestle with God, but he says because you've wrestled with God and man.
Yeah.
And is it possible that during this evening Jacob realized his fault, and it says that he's shown strength to God and man through doing this. And what strength has Jacob shown men up to now? Not much. He's kind of twisted and changed, and he's moved the goalposts, and he's changed the rules, and he hasn't really shown any real strength of character, and he hasn't really shown any dynamic strength. But maybe his asking forgiveness and giving back to the rightful owner the things that were taken from them under deception is showing his strength to men.
Jacob asks, "Please tell me your name," and he answers, "Why are you asking my name?" and blesses him. So you'd have to wonder, first of all, if it was in the scenario of Jacob wrestling with his conscience. I don't know why he would ask himself what his name is. It's like he's having a split personality thing going on. If it's an unknown man, fair enough, because he doesn't recognize who he is. If it's Esau, it could be Esau. I mean, maybe he doesn't fully realize who it is, or maybe Esau senses that he knows who it is, something along those lines. If it's the angel, then the angel perhaps is kind of in a deference to Abba, is saying, "Why are you asking about my name?" As in, it's really only God that matters, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. I do think it's interesting that he says, "Why do you ask about my name?" and then blesses him there.
Yeah. So who has the power to do that?
Well, that's it. But then angels, we read in some translations in the of different Bibles, you'll read angels, and some you'll read messengers, and messengers are given things to deliver,
Yeah.
and one of those things could be a blessing. Something that struck my mind is if Esau was wrestling with himself, and he was doing this after praying to God, it's possible that Jehovah gave a message to Jacob that said, you will come through this. Just believe in the promise.
Yeah.
I believe in the promise. Do as I tell you. Do as your conscience tells you to do, and you will survive. Because that kind of idea of Jacob wrestling with himself, trying to figure out what the right thing to do was, Jehovah stepping in saying, this is the right thing to do. If you do this, you will prosper and you will survive. Ties nice and neatly in with the remainder of the passage.
Okay, well, I'll finish that off. Verse 30. Yaakov called the place Peniel, face of God, because I have seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. As the sun rose upon him, he went on past Peniel, limping at the hip. This is why to this day the people of Israel do not eat the thigh muscle that passes along the hip socket, because the man struck Yaakov's hip at its socket.
Now we're at Genesis 33.
Well, maybe just before we move on there,
okay.
It says, I have seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. So
yeah, but how many wonderful stories have we heard of people whose lives have been utterly desolate, and they've seen God in their lives, but they haven't seen God in their lives, but that his salvation has changed, or his the salvation and the safety that they have in him has changed their outlook.
I agree, but that seeing God and seeing God face to face is a very different thing. I think saying face to face indicates, I mean, if you're wrestling, you're wrestling face to face.
That's true.
That to me intimates that the entity was either a spirit of God, maybe, or a messenger from God.
But then a messenger of God, I don't know if that would necessarily be seeing his face, and who can see the face of Jehovah and live?
Yeah. The last line there about the muscle that passes along the hip socket, this is the one that I was saying earlier in the King James, mentions about the muscle that does not shrink.
You can't let it go.
Which does shrink. I just think that's really odd, that last line there, because, and to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the thigh muscle that passes along the hip socket. It's just so specific to be, like, very remarkable, I think.
Well, I can think of a few customs to do with a man's body that are very specific, and from the same region as well.
I just think it seems, not that obviously if it is that region that's not going to be a peculiar thing, but I just that specific line, I think just because it's so exact about what it is, I just think that's it's just remarkable, that's all. But we shall move on to chapter 33.
And Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and he saw Esau coming, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. It's funny that they were good enough when they wanted babies, and it was all we'll tell them what the name is, but now they're just female servants.
Biblically speaking, they are wives.
I think concubine is a word that might pop up later on.
Yeah.
And he put the female servants and the children in front, and Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. So he wanted to make sure that his favourite wife and his favourite child were in a place which would be the safest. And he himself passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. What a picture there of how worried we are about things which there's no reason to worry about.
I mean, we don't know, obviously, but the fact that Esau ran to meet him suggests that he himself felt emotional about the situation. He wasn't running after him to knock his block off. He was running to meet him, and he hugged him, and he was happy to see him. Who knows, for all those years Esau could have been thinking about this and wondering where he was and wondering how he was getting on. And there he gets a chance to see him, and he isn't angry. And
he, this is like 14 to 20 years after the last time he'd seen him, and he still recognizes him and runs straight up to him.
There is also an aside here which might be interesting to mention. I think it's is it the word for kissed him? that has some annotation in the Hebrew.
It has 6 little dots over
Little
the
dots.
top.
Now, typically, what might have been taught at various times, again, this isn't scriptural, this is more interpretation from the Hebrew text. The little dots on top of the word were taken to mean that these could be the teeth of Esau sinking into the neck of Jacob. I believe that isn't accurate.
It's a nonsense,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
he bite him and then he weeps and falls over his neck and kisses him? It doesn't make any sense.
No, they are annotation marks which are to edit out a mistake. By all accounts, so but it's funny because that then turns into a teaching that people then propagate in their own right.
Yeah, people look for every tiny nuance of text and see if they can change that into a way that appeals to them. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children and said, "Who are these with you?" And he said, "The children of whom Elohim has favored your servant." Female servants came near, and they and their children bowed down themselves. And Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down themselves. And Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down themselves. Then Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in the eyes of my master." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours." And Jacob says, "No, please. If I have now found favor in your eyes, then receive my present from my hand, because I have seen your face, like seeing the face of Elohim, and you were pleased with me." This reminds me a lot of when Abraham was looking for a burial place for Sarai, and he asks the people, "If I have found favor with you, can you pass on this message that I might get this particular cave for Sarai's body?" And he's offered it for free, and Abraham says no, and he's offered it for free, and Abraham says no, and Abraham wants to give to receive this cave. And it seems like the similar conversation here. Jacob wants to pay, and Esau says, "No, I have enough." And Jacob says, "Let me pay." And Esau says, "No, please take my barakah that is brought to you, because Elohim has favored me, and because I have all." But he urged him, and he took it. So eventually Esau does take it. And he said, "Let us depart and go, and let me go before you." But he said to him, "My master knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing are with me need to rest. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flocks should die. Please let my master go before his servant, and let me lead on slowly according to the pace of the livestock that go before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I have come to my master at Seir." And Esau said, "Please let me leave with you some of the people that are with me." And Jacob said, "Why this? Let me find favor in the eyes of my master." And Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. So I think that there's a certain amount of distrust still with Jacob. When Esau offers to leave behind some servants, Jacob says, "No, you don't have to do that. Don't worry, we'll be fine. You carry on ahead. I'm so relieved. You can leave now and everything's going to be fine."
Can I just bring it back for a second? I'm not sure what the exact text was. It might be the same. It's actually going back a couple of lines to verse 10. Yaakov says, "No, please. If now I have won your favor, then accept my gift. Just seeing your face has been like seeing the face of God." Is that what it's in yours?
Yeah, which is one of the reasons people think it may have been Esau
that
wrestled him.
Like a wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, or he could be saying, "I was really worried, and I thought you were going to kill me,
I'm
and
so
you
glad."
didn't. And seeing your face means now I'm safe and I haven't
He
died,
was saved.
and it's a miracle, And seeing you is like seeing the face of God. I lived. He believes that if he sees the face of God, he'll die. But he saw the face of his brother, and he lived when he thought he was going to die. So there's a mirror there, I think. And Jacob departed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock, and that is why the name of the place is called Succoth. And that is why Sukkot is called Sukkot, because a temporary shack for livestock was called a sukkah, and from this word Sukkot. So when we do Sukkot at the end of the next year, we'll be able to think to ourselves, Jacob had a sukkah. Anyway. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. And he came from Padam Haram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And he brought the portion of the field where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 quisita. And I'm assuming I'm saying that right.
In mine it says for 100 pieces of silver.
Ah, that's interesting. Or maybe it's the currency of the area, because I was reading this in the Holman Christian Standard, and it also said quisita.
Ah, okay. It says, from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of silver the parcel of land where he'd pitched his tent. Okay.
And he put up an altar there and called it El Eloah Israel, or the altar of the Lord, or the Lord's altar, depending on the...
So, is that the first place where we see a place called Israel?
I think so.
Yeah, because it's mentioned in the next chapter, I think, as well, but I think this is actually the first place.
And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. That's a very human... Dinah's got loads of brothers, and they might have a couple of female hand servants, but really she's got loads of brothers. And she gets to this new place, and she's like, I'm going to go out and talk to the girls.
Yeah.
So she leaves and runs out to talk to the daughters of the land. And
what age do we think she is, roughly? Like kind of 16, or
no idea.
Younger maybe, or
no, I don't know. Let's hope she's not too young.
I know.
And Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hittite, prince of the land, saw her and took her and lay with her and humbled her. There are a lot of much more extreme translations of this text.
I will give you what's in mine, because that's what we do, so don't be offended. I have, and Shechem, the son of Hamor, the local ruler, saw her, grabbed her, raped her, and humiliated her, which I think is significantly different to what you have in yours.
Very much. Now, although your King James at home is going to say something along the same lines, let's not assume that what we read is actually what it says. And let's take a look at the whole context of what happens between Shechem and Dinah, and see if the character that's portrayed on Shechem right now is the same character that we read from him as we go through.
Now, I just might say, because I did read this earlier and I noted that it was different. In the King James, we have, when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hittite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her, lay with her, and defiled her. Okay. Now, again, that's quite different. Defiled means to be made unclean, really. And defiled is a theme that comes up in the next few passages. Yeah. The Holman Christian Standard Version also says raped. His being clung to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke kindly to her. Which, seems a little bit odd. What a switch around. It really does. And in my one, in the King James here, I read this earlier and I thought, this really is a contrast. It says, and his soul clave into Dinah and loved her, and he spoke kindly to the damsel. When that word cleave is used in Genesis, when we're talking about Adam and Eve. That's right. That a man might leave his father and mother to cleave onto his wife. Or a woman will leave his... Yeah. So... that's like a deep bond. It's like an eternal joining. Yeah. In this version, I think it says, in the complete Jewish version, he was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He fell in love with the girl and tried to win her affection. Now again, that's very different. Very different. So from 34:4, and Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Take this girl for me for a wife." So he's saying to his dad, saying to his pops, look, this girl, I don't want any other girl, I want this one, go and get her, do whatever you have to do, get this girl for me for a wife. And Yaakov heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Yaakov kept silent until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Yaakov to speak with him, and the sons of Yaakov came in from the field when they heard it. And the men were grieved and very wroth, which is downcast and forlorn, because they had done a senseless deed in Israel by lying with Yaakov's daughter, which should not be done. But in mine it says, the outrage this man had committed against Israel. They're concerned really about what this has done to the community, more so than specifically Dinah herself, isn't it?
And I think we'll find out why they're outraged as well. Do they feel that Dinah's been raped, or has someone who is outside of the covenant of Jehovah gone into one of the people in the covenant of Jehovah, and is that the defiling
problem? Yeah.
But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "My son Shechem's being longs for your daughter. Please give her to him for a wife, and intermarry with us. Give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourselves, and dwell with us, and let the land be before you. Dwell and move about in it, and have possessions in it." And Shechem said to her father and her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give." So Shechem realizes that they're not happy with the situation. He realizes his son's done something bad, and is offering to give pretty much whatever he has to atone for this trespass. "Ask of me a bride price and gift ever so high, and I will give according to whatever you say to me, but give me the girl as wife." But the sons of Yaakov answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to them, "We are not able to do this matter, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised." So there's a big red flag there. It wasn't, we can't give our sister to one who raped her, or to one that treats women like that, or to one that treats a stranger or a sojourner in their land like that. It's the circumcision that's bringing up the red flag. "For that would be a reproach to us. Only on this would we agree to you, if you become as we are, to have every male of you circumcised. Then we shall give our daughters to you, and your daughters for us, and we shall dwell with you and become one people." And so even here we see a very early indication that their understanding of being a community, one of those things, one of those kind of gates that you have to go through, is circumcision.
And they describe becoming one people. So once the circumcision or the signing of the contract is done, they're joined together as one community at that point.
"But if you do not listen to us and be circumcised, we shall take our daughter and go." And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And the young man did not delay to do this, because he was delighted in Yaakov's daughter. Now he was more respectful than all of the household of his father.
Because I find this a bit confusing, especially considering what happens in a few lines. In mine it says, "And the young man did not put off doing what was asked of him, even though he was the most respected member of his father's family." So because he so much wanted Yaakov's daughter. The intimation there is that he was the top man in their community, but he didn't mind giving that up to become part of the other community. That's kind of what I read into it.
Yeah, well, that's a fair. Let's have a look what the
It says, "Even though he was the most respected member." And I think the King James says something similar.
So he got it done as quickly as he could. "And Hamor and Shechem his son came to the gate of their city, and spoke with the men of their city, saying, These men are at peace with us, so let them dwell in the land, and move about it. And see, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters for our wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this would the men agree to dwell with us, to be one people. If every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised, the herds, their possessions, and all of their beasts, should they not be ours? Only let us agree with them, and let them dwell with us." So basically he goes and he says, look, these people are going to stay with us. If you get this thing done, the circumcision, like they're circumcised, then all of this wealth that they've amassed will now become our wealth, because we'll become one people.
Yeah, see, that's what I had the problem with. It says he was the most respected member of the father's family. Then he goes and does something like that. He's totally two-faced.
Well, he was respected. He was the most respected member of his family, yeah.
Yeah. I find that very duplicitous. And also, it shows that obviously the circumcision didn't mean he was taking on the covenant of Abraham.
I doubt very much at this stage that they've had a chance to talk about any kind of spiritual reason for getting circumcised.
Yeah.
Jacob and his sons know that this is the way you come under covenant, and they wanted to make sure that their sister was going, if she was going to be with anyone, and that person was going to also come under the covenant, whether they
Yeah,
knew it
but
or not.
surely the covenant is not just a physical thing. So even if they were circumcised, if they hadn't changed their hearts at all,
No, but then we find out that the brothers aren't really that spiritual either, because they're only doing this as a means to get the inhabitants of the city into a position where they're too painful to fight.
I agree. Circumcision doesn't make someone righteous or someone perfect. But what I'm saying is neither side really was right in this. One of them was asking the other to be circumcised without explaining what that actually meant. And then the other was doing it just so that they could get access to their possessions. So it's a bit messed up, I think.
And all who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and Shechem his son, and every male was circumcised. All who went out of the gate of the city. And it came to be on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, and came boldly upon the city, and killed all of the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword. And they took Dinah from Shechem's house, and went out. So at this stage, Dinah was quite happy to live with Shechem. She wasn't living in a separate tent or in a separate house. They were living under the same roof, and we can assume that they were living as man and wife. The sons of Yaakov came upon the slain and plundered the city, because they had defiled her sister. They took their flocks, and their herds, and their donkeys, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field, and all their wealth, and all their little ones, and their wives they took captives, and they plundered all that was in the houses. And Yaakov said to Shimon and Levi, You have troubled me by making me a stench among the inhabitants of this land, amongst the Canaanites, amongst the Perizzites.
Just before you go on any further, in mine it says, making me stink in the opinion of the local inhabitants.
Yeah, I think that's
kind of raised a chuckle.
Yeah, and although that's quite a strong word, I imagine that it wasn't even close to what they thought about Jacob at this point. This guy that had come in and made a pact that he then completely not only broke, but he slew everyone that was involved. And I am few in number. They shall gather themselves against me, and shall smite me, and I shall be destroyed, my household and I. This is quite interesting here as well, because Jacob's not going, You've done a really bad thing, how could you have done this thing? I made this promise. He says, You've done a really bad thing, because I'm in no position to be able to defend myself. And they said, Should he treat our sister like a whore? I think some versions have prostitute.
Yeah, mine says whore. Okay, so I'll pick up from chapter 35. God said to Yaakov, Get up, go up to Bethel and live there, and make there an altar to God, who appeared to you when you fled Esau your brother. Okay, so I found this a bit confusing when I read this. This is God speaking to Yaakov, and God tells him to go and make an altar to God. Now we are told later not to make altars to God. So I don't know. Do you find any problem with that or any issue with that?
I think that, like any person who's new to a way of worshipping, I mean, Abraham built an altar to God without being asked to do it, and we're told that God doesn't like those high places.
Well, it's mainly because people use it to
other
pray
things.
to other gods, really, isn't it?
But maybe Elohim knows that Yaakov needs something to do, and Yaakov is familiar with this practice, and uses this as a way of introducing some form of obedience and sacrifice.
Then Yaakov said to his household and all the others with him, Get rid of the foreign gods that you have with you. Purify yourselves and put on fresh clothes. We're going to move on and go up to Bethel. There I will build an altar to God, who answered me when I was in such distress and stayed with me wherever I went.
We remember that Yaakov is in the desert, and God says, I am with you for always. And Jacob says, Look, do this for me and do that for me, and then you will be my God. So it seems that up until this point, Yaakov's servants and family are still praying to other deities.
Well, okay, so we've got Rachel, who we never found out what happened to the idols.
No, it looks like maybe they never went anywhere.
Yeah, they stayed with the community. Also, we were told that the young ones and the women from the Shechem's household and the whole community came with them. They took them.
They
So
could-
it's potential they could have had
Yeah.
idols, and they kind of defiled the camp by having them with them. So it could be that.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
Okay. They gave Yaakov all the foreign gods in their possession and the earrings that they were wearing, and Yaakov buried them under the pistachio tree near Shechem. While they were traveling, a terror from God fell upon the cities around them, so that none of them pursued the sons of Yaakov. So basically, God put a kind of literally the fear of God into the people, so they didn't try and attack
They
them
left them
as
alone.
they got away.
Yeah.
Yaakov and all the people with him arrived at Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. He built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, God of Bethel, because it was there that God was revealed to him at the time when he was fleeing from his brother. Then Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. She was buried below Bethel under the oak, which was given the name Alon Bachut, Oak of Weeping. After Yaakov arrived from Padan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. God said to him, "Your name is Yaakov, but you will be called Yaakov no longer. Your name will be Israel." Thus he named him Israel. God further said to him, "I am El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, indeed, a group of nations, will come from you. Kings will be descended from you. Moreover, the land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you." We see God repeating the blessing and him being renamed there.
Yeah.
Because that's already happened. So
It has, and there's a small part of me that says often a story will have a recap.
a recap. Yeah.
That's why we get the creation story twice.
Yeah.
And so it's conceivable that they're saying, but it says Elohim appeared to Yaakov again, so it says it's happening twice. And maybe Yaakov didn't believe it, or maybe Yaakov's still not doing it perfectly, and Elohim needs to come down and say, "Look, I've told you already," and put him on the right track.
Then God went up from him there, where he had spoken with him. Yaakov set up a standing stone in the place where he had spoken with him, a stone altar. Then he poured out a drink offering on it, and poured oil on it. Yaakov called the place where God spoke to him Bethel. But are we not told already how he names it Bethel?
We are.
Then they travelled on from Bethel, and while there was still some distance to go before arriving in Ephrat, Rachel went into labour, and she had great difficulty with it. While she was undergoing this hard labour, the midwife said to her, "Don't worry, this is also a son for you." But she died in childbirth. As she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni, son of my grief, but his father called him Binyamin, son of the right hand, son of the south. Now it's quite pretty. In some versions it says, "while her soul was departing."
Or was she breathed her last?
Yeah, which is quite poetic. Also, you might also hear, when you hear labour, it's often travail, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you would hear instead there. I know that's in another version. So we have, she called him Ben-Oni, son of my grief, but Jacob renamed him Binyamin, which is unusual, isn't it?
I think it's the only time that happens.
Yeah. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. So that's Bethlehem.
Yeah.
Yaakov set up a standing stone on her grave. It is the standing stone of Rachel's grave to this day. And that is still the case, isn't it? That people still go to where they say is
where they
her
think
grave.
it is, yeah.
Yeah. Israel continued his travels. Now there, like, he's being referred to as Israel, which is kind of cool. Is that the first time in the kind of narrative?
It's the first time in the narrative, yeah.
Yeah. Israel continued his travels and pitched his tent on the other side of Migdal Adar.
The Tower of Adar.
It was while Israel was living in that land that Reuben went and slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and
Ew.
Israel heard about it, which is nasty.
It is nasty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Israel must be kind of knocking on a little bit, and
Bilhah.
he's basically sleeping with his stepbrother's mum.
Yeah, it's a bit messed up. Yaakov had 12 sons. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Yaakov's firstborn, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's slave girl, were Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah were Leah's slave girl, were Gad and Asher. These were Yaakov's sons, born to him in Padan Aram. Yaakov came home to his father Yitzhak at Mamre, near Kiryat Arba, also known as Hebron, where Abraham and Yitzhak had lived as foreigners. Yitzhak lived to be 180 years old. When he breathed his last, died, and was gathered to his people, an old man full of years, and his sons Esau and Yaakov buried him.
And it's nice we see Esau and Yaakov burying him, and we see Isaac and Ishmael burying Abraham. It seems like the custom of the time was to, where possible, have the sons bury the father.
Yeah, regardless of how they felt about each other, they often came together at this point.
Yeah, put that aside. So here we are at Genesis 36.
Just before we move on to that,
Okay.
We had this phrase comes up a lot, being gathered to his people. This is, so we read, is a custom whereby their bones are physically gathered. Is that correct?
In some versions, that's what it means, but we don't have that. We're not able to see what that means in this particular book.
Yeah. It can, some people think of it as a term, like a nice term for someone returning to their ancestors or going back to, where they came from. It can also be an actual gathering whereby they waited a certain amount of time and the remains were gathered together and kept in a kind of an urn. But yeah, we don't know for sure.
The Hebrew for it, gathered unto his people, and gather is osaf, and it literally means to remove, take away, or receive. So it does denote some sort of physical act. As I was saying, that often the case was the body would be left until it was just bones, and then they were taken away. But that doesn't suggest that would happen within a short period of time.
No, it takes
the chances are the body was left somewhere, and then they went back for it later. Genesis 36. And this was the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah, and the daughters of Elon the Hittite, and Oholibamah, you have to excuse my pronunciation, the daughter of Anah, and the daughter of Tishbon the Hittite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebaioth. And Edah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Esemath bore Rehuel. And looking through the rest of this Torah portion, I think you can probably take that up yourself, because it's going to take another hour for me just to knock these names out of the ballpark. So we're going to skip to 36:6. And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the belongings of the household and his herds and all his beasts and all his possessions which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and went to a land away from the presence of his brother Yaakov, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land of their sojournings could not support them because of their herds. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir, and Esau is Edom. And this is the genealogy, and we have another lovely genealogy of Esau here, which goes on for pages and pages. But basically, what we see here is the older brother, who Yaakov was in fear of, being a giving and kind person. He says, I'm the older. He would have claim on that land, but something in him has changed, as well as something in Yaakov, because we read Esau being a much more tempestuous, I want it now, demanding spirit in the earlier days of his life, and now he's obviously had, is a bit older, is a bit more relaxed about things, and I think he's chilled out. And now he's looking at Israel, he's looking at Jacob. He realizes that there's some great purpose that's being fulfilled here.
His blessing that he's given, he isn't given much by way of a blessing from his father, but he is told that he will break the yoke of the brother who has power over him. So perhaps, I don't know, maybe a little bit of that is instilled in him, and he has confidence, and he doesn't have to be stressed out and angry perhaps over time he has accepted this, and he has confidence in the fact that he has better stuff to come, that he's not holding on perhaps to the yoke of all that baggage that happened way back when. Maybe he's let that go and he's broken that.
We can skip to the end of 36 after this, another series of brilliant genealogies which would challenge any tongue.
Yeah, we'd encourage you to read through this yourself, actually, because Again, a tough one to get through reading it out, but it's basically, for the most part, it's the whole of chapter 36, so have a read of that in your own leisure.
And the very last line in this Torah portion is Esau was the father of the Edomites. I'd also suggest for interest's sake, that you have a little look at the Edomites, the history that's attached traditionally with the Edomite culture, and what certain people believe the Edomites are today. An eye-opener. So that was our Torah portion for this week, and it was a good one. Lots of interesting stuff happening. If you have any comments that you'd like to make on the content of our Torah portion, we apologize for the mispronunciations. But if you have any comments on or themes that we don't think we covered, or anything you think that we'd be interested in knowing, send us a link, send us a message, send us a comment to Facebook page, which is Facebook.com/Jason Spiritualbabies, or you can send us a comment on our page on our website, which is Spiritualbabies.net, or you can even leave a comment under the YouTube video, which is Spiritual Babies as well. There'll be a link.
Just Google Spiritual Babies. We're there. So we'd love to hear from you. I will say shalom until next time.
And I will say shalom until next time as well, because I can never think of a decent way of signing off. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you all again next week for next week's Spiritual Babies Baby Talk.
Shalom.